On this Tuesday night, pediatric flu cases flooding Canadian hospitals, the wave of new infections, and the calls to get kids vaccinated.
We know influenza can cause more severe illness in children.
Plus, the challenges immigrant doctors face working in Canada. Government waste exposed, the millions of COVID vaccine doses thrown out, and the billions in overpaid benefits. The search for the remains of 3 murdered Indigenous women. Why Winnipeg police say they won't explore a landfill site. And squad goals.
We need a league of our own.
Getting the ball rolling on Canada's first women's professional soccer league.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The flu epidemic is tightening its grip on Canadians, and health officials are urging people to get vaccinated, including young children. The wave of flu viruses arrived early, beating many vaccination campaigns to the punch. The result has been a surge of sick children, canceled surgeries, and traumatized families. In the last few weeks alone, there's been a dramatic spike in pediatric hospitalizations because of the flu. Children between the ages of 2 and 4 and 5 and 9 are accounting for more than 50% of cases. And it is crushing hospitals that were already operating at capacity. As Heather Yourex-West reports, the pressure is so intense, Alberta's Children's Hospital is cutting services at some outpatient clinics in order to redeploy staff to deal with emergencies.
Sirens on, blaring, get her down to Children's Hospital. Within about an hour, she was intubated there.
Sedated and on a ventilator, 4.5-year-old Andy Lloyd spent more than a week inside the Alberta Childrens Hospital ICU, sick with pneumonia caused by the flu.
She's like lifeless, it looks like almost. She's on life support. So it was terrifying, absolutely just terrifying.
A triple-demic of viruses have been putting pressure on children's hospitals for more than a month. But although RSV cases appear to be stabilizing, flu numbers are on the rise.
We know much more than COVID. Influenza can cause more severe illness in children, especially young children.
So many kids are now in need of hospital care that surgeries are being cancelled in Newfoundland, Ontario, Alberta, and BC. The situation so serious in Calgary, where in addition to redeploying staff from a pediatric respite program, 5 clinics for kids with kidney and other serious illnesses are now having their service levels reduced.
The more flu vaccines that we can get into patients and children and families, I think would really help.
Flu shots have been available in most parts of the country since late October, and it's well matched to the circulating strain of influenza A. But so far, less than 25% of the population has rolled up their sleeve.
I think there is fatigue in the population around vaccination. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of the misinformation that spread around the COVID vaccine has led to some vaccine hesitancy or uncertainty in the population.
If you can get the flu shot, I urge you to go and get the flu shot.
Andy was finally discharged last week after nearly 2 weeks in intensive care. A harrowing experience her mother hopes they'll never have to live through again. Heather Yourex-West, Global News, Calgary.
There is no easy solution to the crisis in healthcare. One thing that could help ease the burden is licensing internationally trained doctors. BC is expanding a program that makes that easier and faster. Ontario has a similar plan in place. In 2021, international medical graduates made up more than 1/4 of practicing physicians in Ontario. 34% of Alberta's physician workforce is made up of international medical grads. That's well above the national average. And in BC, 31% of doctors are internationally trained. Neetu Garcha looks at how BC intends to increase that.
Hello, how are you?
Dr. Naveed Puyan is a physician who immigrated from Iran.
We are servicing at least 200 patients per day.
But he says he and others are dealing with burnout and high overhead costs, largely because in BC, unlike Canadian medical graduates, licensed foreign-trained doctors are forced to areas with significant need in specific predetermined clinics where they're unable to negotiate their costs or contracts, in some ways essentially a penalty for not being trained in Canada.
They don't have much freedom to choose their work conditions. Multiple examples that the immigrant physicians at the same clinic pays higher overhead billing split compared to the counterpart Canadians.
And that's if they can get licensed. BC has announced a new plan to triple the number of foreign-trained doctors by 2024.
That's why we're taking action to get more internationally trained doctors off the sidelines.
It's being done through the Practice Ready Assessment Program, an evaluation process which is consistent and comparable across the country and used by all but 3 provinces, PEI, New Brunswick and Ontario, which is where Dr. Shafi Bouya trains hundreds of foreign-trained physicians.
We need a fairness in the system.
He believes the key is to create equal opportunities for internationally trained doctors once they're licensed to practice in Canada.
You have a license number, but you are not opportunity to call for residency. It's not so super rocket science. We just need to change the attitude because ITPs are Canadian. They are the taxpayer.
There's a need to make family practice more appealing to all medical graduates who often grapple with issues around fee structures and clinic expenses, according to the head of the Alberta International Medical Graduates Association.
We're having difficulty sometimes getting Canadian medical graduates going into family medicine, which is where, there is a huge need.
If they have passed the qualification exams and criteria, they should be treated same as the Canadian doctors.
Neetu Garcha, Global News, Coquitlam, BC.
Canada's Auditor General has gone through the federal pandemic response with a fine-tooth comb and turned up lots of waste. She broke down billions in benefits that she calls overpayments made by Ottawa and billions more that still need serious scrutiny. Mackenzie Gray reports.
It was at the heart of the COVID response. Benefits like the CERB and wage subsidy, quickly implemented to help Canadians, but it's that same speed, the Auditor General says, led to a key problem.
Billions of dollars have gone or may have gone to ineligible recipients.
Of the over $210 billion in pandemic supports, Karen Hogan found the government gave out over $4.6 billion to people not eligible for benefits at all, and that at least $27.4 billion went to individuals and employers that need to be investigated further by the CRA. Investigations the Auditor General doesn't think will materialize, saying Canadians shouldn't expect significant unrecoverable amounts from those billions.
And I'm just asking the government to be clear with its decisions and its approaches to Canadians. Right now, the legislation would require them to follow up with every individual and business that is ineligible.
The minister in charge of the CRA disagreeing with the Auditor General. Diane Louis-Boutillier saying Hogan got her calculations wrong and exaggerated her figures. Wide-scale enforcement from Louis-Boutillier's agency seems unlikely. It wouldn't be cost-effective to pursue 100% of all potentially ineligible claims, says the CRA. The Conservatives, who voted in favor of creating programs like the CERB and wage subsidy, are linking these payments to increased inflation.
Wasteful spending due to a lack of controls, as identified by the Auditor General, has contributed to the cost of living crisis we see today.
The Liberals say they have no regrets for how they rolled out the programs.
These benefits kept the economy afloat at a time of unprecedented risk. They kept people out of poverty, addressed income inequality, and facilitated Canada's economic rebound.
Despite the ineligible payments, Hogan found the government met their objectives by keeping Canadians afloat, saying the poverty rate would have nearly doubled during the pandemic without the benefits. Donna?
Okay, Mackenzie Gray in Ottawa, thank you. The Auditor General also looked into what was the largest mass vaccination campaign in Canadian history. She says the federal government did a good job sourcing and distributing COVID-19 vaccine doses quickly, but failed to prevent millions of shots being wasted. The report estimates 169 million vaccine doses have been sourced at an average cost of $30 a shot. That adds up to about $5 billion. As of May 31st, more than 30 million doses remained in inventories across the country. Another 50 million are deemed surplus. Of those, the Auditor General says more than 13 million have already expired, costing Canadians $408 million. Winnipeg police are defending their decision not to search a landfill for the remains of 3 murdered Indigenous women. Investigators suspect their bodies may be there, but say searching it is not feasible for a number of reasons. The families of the victims don't accept that.
So what we're left with is the potential task of searching for human remains across a 4-acre site that was 40 feet in depth, heavily compacted with 9,000 tons of wet, heavy construction clay. and distributed throughout the site was 250 tons of asbestos.
My mother didn't pass away with a home, so let's pay her the respect that she deserves by finally giving her one that's not a resting place at the Prairie Green landfill, and for these other women as well.
Jeremy Skibicki was initially charged with first-degree murder in the death of Rebecca Contois. Her body was found. Last week, he was also charged in the deaths of Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myran, and a fourth woman known as Buffalo Woman. Their bodies have yet to be recovered and are believed to be in the Prairie Green landfill. The loss of biodiversity is happening faster now than at any time in modern human history, and that is the focus of negotiators from 196 countries meeting at a UN conference in Montreal. As Mike Armstrong explains, doubters say you only have to look at past conferences for a sign of what's to come.
Humanity seems hell-bent on destruction.
It was with that warning United Nations Secretary General opened this convention. That said, work at COP15 has begun. Over the last few days, delegates have held early meetings day and night to set the table. But the convention's executive secretary admits things aren't where they should be.
Some progress has been made, but not so much as needed or expected.
Now, this conference was supposed to be held in China in 2020. The pandemic pushed it back until it was eventually moved to Montreal just this past June.
We got an extra 2 years from the scourge of COVID. Let us not squander that.
The goal of COP15 is to protect the world's biodiversity. Human activities have affected more than 97% of the world's ecosystems. That has left more than 1 million species of animals and plants threatened with extinction. A major target to turn that tide is what's being called 30 by 30. It would have the 192 countries participating agree to protect 30% of their territory by 2030. But when the world last met to iron out a 10-year biodiversity plan, it set out 28 targets, and globally, none were met. Organizers say this meeting brings together more participants, not just governments, and the problem is more pressing.
We didn't achieve our targets before because we didn't give ourselves the means to do it.
Now, there are multiple planned protests around the convention. The first is set for Wednesday morning. It's being called an assault on the convention center by a group that says it's a coalition of ecologists and anti-capitalists. There was an unexpected brief protest at the conference Monday. The Prime Minister's opening remarks were interrupted by an Indigenous group. Justin Trudeau seemed to shake it off, saying COP21 is about listening to all voices. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
Access to abortion coming up. Global News investigates why some clinics in Ontario are struggling to survive. Since the U.S. Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, Canada's federal government said Americans unable to access an abortion there could come here. But there are issues in Canada, too. Though there are no laws banning abortion in Canada, access to it varies widely depending on where you live. And now a months-long investigation by Global News reveals some Ontario clinics are struggling to stay open. Jasmine Pazzano reports.
This Ontario abortion clinic manager is speaking publicly for the first time.
I was absolutely disgusted when I heard what had happened in the U.S.
And he says it's time for Canadians to talk about our own abortion access.
I would love for us to take steps forward in making sure that these services are protected and women will always have access to them.
Global News agreed not to reveal Omar's last name or where he works.
I've had friends that live in the U.S. call me immediately after they heard what had happened, and they were begging me to give them options. They were telling me, they're like, please, what should I do if I become pregnant? Can I come to Canada?
4, 6, 8, you can make us procreate!
Unlike in some U.S. states, there are no laws in Canada banning abortions, but equal access to abortion services is not guaranteed. A Global News investigation in Ontario found abortion centers that are suffering from financial neglect, some struggling to stay afloat in a system where not all providers are treated equally. In the early 1990s, Ontario began funding the overhead of a select few independent surgical abortion clinics. This improved access and increased medical safety. But since then, 4 more similar clinics have opened, and they receive no such support from the province. Omar's is one of them.
I don't really understand or know how they've come to the conclusion that these 4 clinics deserve funding while other clinics don't.
Abortions are covered in Ontario, with the province reimbursing doctors for insured care. But Omar says that money is not enough to cover all of the expenses needed to keep his clinic going.
We have to pay for medication out of pocket. We do pay for rent. We also do pay the salary of all the nurses and counselors and secretaries that we have working for us.
On top of this, there are services his clinic offers that Ontario doesn't cover, including running a 24-hour patient hotline. So to maintain these services, he relies on his patients to pay a fee, but only if they can.
A lot of times we'd actually rather see it as a donation. With the specific demographic that we deal with, a lot of the patients are not actually able to pay how much we charge, which is $60.
It speaks to the commitment of those who are providing the service, because they're doing it because they're meeting a need. They're doing it even though they're being financially stretched to provide it.
Omar says his clinic has asked Ontario for funding twice.
No response either time.
No. Just for the first time, they said that our requests would be forwarded to the people that make these decisions, and then we never got any follow-up as a result.
In an email, Global News asked Ontario's Ministry of Health for a response to Omar's claims and why clinics like his are excluded from its funding model. A ministry spokesperson replied in a statement, but never answered these questions.
What would happen to abortion access if clinics like yours were forced to shut down?
Oh, it'd be a huge blow. If we were forced to shut down, I cannot imagine where all those patients would go.
If you're in a situation where the clinics can no longer be sustained, you're putting access really in jeopardy.
There are only so many people Omar can help in a system at risk of failure. Jasmine Pisano, Global News, Toronto.
Tomorrow we'll look at what changes are coming to funding and operation of Ontario's abortion clinics. Back to the polls ahead. What's at stake in the runoff vote in the state of Georgia? Former U.S. President Donald Trump's family real estate company has been found guilty of 17 counts of tax fraud and other financial crimes. The Trump Organization was convicted on all counts after 2 days of jury deliberations in New York. Trump himself was not on trial. The prosecutors insisted he was fully aware of the scheme. Voters in the state of Georgia are in the midst of a runoff election that will decide the last outstanding U.S. Senate race. Trump's hand-picked candidate, Herschel Walker, is facing Democratic incumbent Raphael Warnock. Farah Nasser reports on what's at stake.
Georgia voters braving the rain and cold to cast a ballot for the final contest at the 2022 midterms, after neither candidate was able to win the state's required 50% of the vote.
It's such a privilege and an honor to get out here and do my civic duty.
While the Senate has already been won by the Democrats, this runoff has smashed early voting records, partly because of who is running. Incumbent Raphael Warnock, a pastor.
Georgia's better than Herschel Walker.
Amen. And Walker, a Trump-picked Republican former football star with a problematic past.
We're going out to win this election. So this election, I'm telling people to get out and vote.
Herschel Walker will probably go down as one of the worst Republican candidates in our party's history.
Winning Georgia isn't just about a single Senate seat here in Congress. It's about an outright majority, a majority in committees, making it easier to confirm judges and pass legislation.
Georgia is a swing state, and what happens in Georgia is a real harbinger of what's going to happen in the United States in the coming years. Georgia looks like the rest of the United States in terms of its demographic composition and in terms of its political composition.
Professor Todd Belt says the race in the Peach State could change the way candidates are picked by the Republicans.
We might be seeing more candidates coming up through the regular pipeline to challenge Democrats in the future, rather than these one-off celebrity candidates.
Trump was encouraged to stay away as he faces the embarrassment of yet another hand-picked candidate going down in defeat. Farah Nasser, Global News, Washington.
Growing the game next. Big plans for women's professional soccer in Canada. The Men's World Cup is dominating sports news right now, but wait for it. Canadian women have big plans. They already dominate the game. The Canadian women's team won gold at the 2020 Olympics. Yet Canadian women have to move abroad to play professionally. As Mike Armstrong reports, that is about to change.
It's the fastest growing sport in Canada, hands down. Yet the road for Canadian girls to compete on a bigger stage has always led them abroad. But that will change in 2025 with the launch of a yet-to-be-named Canadian Professional League.
One day I want to go in the soccer league, the girls' soccer league, and make it up there one day.
The Canadian League has ambitious goals. They want 8 teams and competitive salaries with foreign leagues.
We're setting our sights high because we don't think there's any reason not to, given our player pool, given the companies that are behind this.
Historically, women's team sports have proven to be a tough sell. Tennis and golf routinely draw huge numbers, but the WNBA averaged 5,700 fans per game last season. The U.S.-based National Women's Soccer League did a little better with 7,900.
We've set projected attendance at 3,700 average per game. We think that's reasonable and we think it's conservative.
Joining the NWSL was considered, but the reported $50 million expansion fee is too high. And bottom line, they want opportunities for Canadian girls.
To be fair, the NWSL is an American league, and they're looking out for their American players, as they should be. And that's why we need a league of our own.
Christine Sinclair needs no introduction. She's the top international scorer of all time, man or woman. Her brand may be established, but she argues other Canadian players have lost out on marketing opportunities by virtue of not playing at home.
Every time any of us are back in Canada, the draw is there. People want to hear from you. The kids want to see you. Companies want to engage with you. But if you're living in England, how many days can you commit to being in Canada realistically throughout the course of a year?
One of these girls could be the next Christine Sinclair, but without the opportunity, we'll never know. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Toronto.
That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the work of the BC Professional Firefighters Burn Fund in Vancouver's Stanley Park. Always stunning. We'd love to see your Festive Canada photos. Please email them to us. And thanks for watching. Bye-bye.